The emptiness of space suddenly filled with terror as massive ships appeared near Earth's solar system. These were not ordinary vessels. They looked like living nightmares pulled from the deepest fears of any thinking creature. The Vorthok ships, twisted and moved like giant sea monsters, covered in glowing spots that pulsed with sickly green light. Tentacles as long as city blocks writhed from their hulls, and what looked like enormous eyes blinked slowly along their sides. On the bridge of the human warship Defiance, Commander Minho watched the enemy fleet through the main screen. Dark eyes stayed calm as he studied the alien vessels that had made entire civilizations surrender without firing a single shot. Around him, the alien diplomats from other worlds who had come to observe began to shake with fear. The Zentari ambassador, a tall blue creature with 4 arms, dropped to the floor and curled into a ball. "The fear song," he whispered. "It has begun. We are all doomed." But the humans on the bridge looked perfectly normal. Communications Officer G1 turned to her commander with a slight smile. "Sir, we're getting their usual scary message." Nodded, put it on screen. The main display filled with something that should have driven viewers insane with terror. A mass of writhing tentacles surrounded a mouth full of too many teeth, as opened and closed randomly across its surface. And when it spoke, the voice sounded like metal grinding against stone mixed with the screams of the dying. "Foolish humans," the creature hissed, its voice making the alien diplomats whimper in fear. "We are the Vorthok, or the darkness that lives between the stars, or the nightmare that has broken the minds of 1,000 worlds. Your species will bow before us, or face horrors beyond imagination. Choose quickly, submit now, or watch as we turn your greatest fears into reality." The alien diplomats sobbed quietly, but the human crew remained unmoved. Navigation Officer Sung Min actually yawned. "Is it just me? Or does this thing look like that monster from the old Earth movie about the underwater city?" Weapons Officer Hai Jin nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, definitely reminds me of something from our horror films. The special effects are pretty good, though." Commander Minho stood up and walked closer to the screen, studying the creature with the same interest a scientist might show when looking at an interesting bug. "Open a return channel, G1. "Channel open, sir." Minho cleared his throat and spoke in a calm, almost bored voice. "This is Commander Park Minho of the United Earth Defense Forces. We received your message, and honestly, we're not impressed. If you want to scare humans, you'll need to try a lot harder than that. We've been scaring ourselves with monsters like you since before we could write. Thanks for the show, but we'll pass on the whole surrendering thing." The Vorthok creatures. Many eyes blinked in confusion. In all their history of conquest, no species had ever responded with such casual dismissal. "You dare mock the terror of the Vorthok?" The creature roared, its voice now mixed with rage and confusion. "Mock you?" Minho laughed. "We're not mocking you. We're just not scared. Your whole look is very reminiscent of works by human artists from centuries ago. H.P. Lovecraft would probably sue you for copyright violation if he was still alive." The alien diplomats stared at the humans in shock. The Zentari ambassador managed to whisper, "How are you not afraid? The fear waves should be driving you mad with terror." Science Officer Kyungsu looked up from his instruments. "Oh, those low-frequency sound waves. We detected them, but they don't really affect humans much. We actually use similar frequencies. In some of our music, we call it death metal." The Vorthok creature on the screen seemed to be having trouble processing this information. "Impossible. Every species fears the unknown. Every mind breaks when faced with true cosmic horror. Unknown." Tactical Officer Boyoung laughed. "There's nothing unknown about you guys. We've got entire libraries full of stories about creatures exactly like you. Movies, books, games, you name it. Some kid probably drew something that looks just like you in art class last week." The truth was slowly dawning on the Vorthok. They had built their entire civilization on being the ultimate source of fear in the galaxy. Every world that saw their ships would surrender immediately, too terrified to fight. But these humans seemed genuinely unimpressed. Commander Minho turned to his crew. "Battle stations, everyone. Looks like we're going to show the galaxy something new today." As alarms began to sound throughout the human fleet, Minho opened a channel to all Earth vessels. This is Commander Park to all units. We have contact with the famous Vorthok terror fleet. They seem to think they can scare us into giving up. I think it's time we showed them what humans do to monsters. Across the fleet, human crew members cheered and laughed. They had grown up on stories of heroes fighting creatures far worse than anything the Vorthok could imagine. Today, they would become those heroes. The Vorthok had spent millions of years perfecting the art of fear. They were about to learn that. Humans had spent just as long learning not to be afraid. News of the Vorthok arrival spread across Earth faster than any invasion fleet could travel. But instead of panic and fear, something unexpected happened. Recruitment centers became packed, with volunteers wanting to join the fight. Long lines of people stretched around city blocks, eager to face the galaxy's most feared monsters. Dr. Sujin sat in her research lab, watching news feeds from around the planet with amazement. As Earth's leading expert on alien psychology, she had been called to help understand why the Vorthok fear weapons worked on every other species, but seemed useless against humans. It's really quite simple, she explained to the military leaders gathered around her holographic display. The Vorthok have been using the same tricks for thousands of years. They show their enemies shape-shifting monsters, cosmic horrors, and nightmare creatures. But humans have been creating these exact same monsters in our stories for centuries. General Dong-Su leaned forward. What do you mean? Sujin pulled up images from the Vorthok database, alongside human movies and books. Look here. They're soul-devouring shadow creatures. We made movies about shadow monsters in the 1920s. They're impossible geometric shapes that drive minds. Insane, our artist M.C. Escher was drawing those in the 1950s. They're shape-shifting. Horrors that take the form of your loved ones? We have dozens of films about that. On the screen, she showed scene after scene of human entertainment that looked almost identical to Vorthok terror weapons. We don't just know these monsters. We invented them first. We've been scaring ourselves with these ideas for so long that seeing the real thing is almost nostalgic. Meanwhile, on the Vorthok flagship, War Master Kethvel was having his own crisis. His intelligence officers had been studying human culture, and their reports made no sense. Explain this to me again, he demanded, his voice echoing through the bioship's living walls. These humans create fear images for entertainment. His aide, a smaller horror creature named Yithmar, trembled as it spoke. Yes, War Master. They have entire industries built around creating increasingly frightening scenarios. They call them horror movies and video games. Their young ones actively seek out these fear experiences. That's impossible, Kethval hissed. Species willingly exposes itself to terror. Fear is what keeps creatures alive. The reports are verified, War Master. They even have competitions to see who can create the most frightening scenarios, and they laugh during many of these fear experiences. Back on Earth, the evidence was everywhere. Horror movie directors were being recruited as military consultants. Video game designers were helping plan battle strategies. Children were drawing pictures of Vorthok creatures for school art projects, often with helpful suggestions for making them scarier. 80-year-old Min Jun showed his drawing to his teacher. This one needs more teeth, he said, pointing at his crayon version of a Vorthok warrior, and maybe some slime.
Oh, monsters are always better with slime.
His teacher, Ms. Young-A, nodded seriously. Very good observations, Min Jun. What about the color scheme? The green is okay, but maybe some red eyes would be better. Green eyes aren't scary anymore. Everyone uses green. Similar conversations were happening in classrooms across the planet. Human children were critiquing cosmic horrors with the same enthusiasm they brought to discussing their favorite cartoon characters. Dr. Sujin received more data from human colonies throughout the solar system. The pattern is consistent everywhere, she reported. Humans exposed to Vorthok fear weapons show curiosity, excitement, and in some cases, disappointment that the aliens aren't more creative. The military was seeing similar results. Colonel Jamin Reed reports from the first encounters with Vorthok scouts. Marine Unit Bravo 7 encountered shape-shifting infiltrators yesterday. Instead of being terrified, they started a betting pool on what form the aliens would take next. Private Kim won 50 credits when she correctly guessed giant spider. Captain Yunhee added her own experience. My crew encountered what the Vorthex call a sanity-breaking geometric anomaly in Sector 7. Chief Engineer Park spent 3 hours trying to figure out how it worked and asked if we could get the blueprints. The truth was becoming clear to both sides. Humans had spent thousands of years imagining every possible form of monster, horror, and nightmare. They had created entire mythologies around fighting these creatures. Heroes battling dragons, space, Marines fighting aliens, teenagers surviving slasher films. It was all part of human culture. War Master. Athvel received another disturbing report. War Master, the humans have begun creating new fear images based on us. They call them memes, and they are. They're making fun of our appearance. Show me. The display filled with human internet creations, Vorthok creatures with funny captions, cosmic horrors wearing silly hats, nightmare monsters in embarrassing situations. Millions of humans were sharing these images and laughing. They're not just unafraid, Yithmer whispered. They're turning us into entertainment. For the first time in their history, the Vorthok were experiencing something they had never felt before, the fear of being irrelevant. Their entire identity was built on being the ultimate source of terror in the galaxy. But these humans treated them like characters from their children's stories. The galaxy's greatest monsters were discovering that humans had already imagined them, improved upon them, and moved on to scarier things. The first real fight happened when Vorthok scout ships tried to take over the human cargo vessel New Hope. The alien infiltrators used their most powerful weapon, the ability to change shape into whatever their victims feared most. This trick had worked perfectly on every other species in the galaxy. Security Chief Teho was doing his regular patrol when the lights suddenly went out. Strange sounds echoed through the corridors, wet sliding noises mixed with whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Most creatures would have been paralyzed with fear by now. Instead, Teho pulled out his phone and started recording. "Hey everyone," he whispered into the camera. "Looks like we've got some Vorthok shapeshifters on board. This is going to be awesome." He'd been live streaming his security rounds for months, and his followers loved watching life on a space cargo ship. Now he had something really exciting to show them. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway, slowly taking the shape of something impossible. Too many arms, eyes where there shouldn't be eyes, and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. The creature made a sound like screaming mixed with fingernails on a chalkboard. "Oh wow," Teho said, zooming in with his camera. "Look at that practical effect work. The movement is so smooth. Hey, can you turn around? I want to get the back view." The Vorthok infiltrator paused. In thousands of years of terror campaigns, no one had ever asked it to pose for pictures. The creature tried again, shifting into what should have been Teho's worst childhood memory, his grandmother, but wrong in every way. Her face was rotting, her eyes were black holes, and she spoke in a voice like grinding glass. "Teho," she wheezed, "why didn't you visit me before I died?" Teho studied the apparition critically. "Nice try, but you got the details wrong. Grandma walked with a cane because of her bad hip, and she never called me by my full name." "Always," said Tay-Tay. "Also, she died peacefully in her sleep, so the whole rotting thing doesn't make sense." The shapeshifter flickered, its form becoming unstable. It fed on fear, and there was none here, only curiosity and mild disappointment. Meanwhile, on Earth, Teho's live stream was breaking viewing records. Comments flooded in faster than anyone could read them. "Oh my god, it's like The Thing but in real life. Ask it to do the head-spinning thing from The Exorcist. The CGI budget for this must be insane. Wait, this is real. No way. Down in the cargo, Bay engineer Sung-hee was having her own encounter. A Vorthok warrior had cornered her, taking the form of a massive spider-like creature with human faces for eyes. It screeched at her with a sound designed to shatter minds. Sung-hee clapped her hands together. "Oh my god, you're like that boss from the video game I played last week, but bigger. And the texture work on your carapace is incredible. Is that all natural? Or do you guys use some kind of bio-enhancement?" The creature backed away, confused. Its fear scream wasn't working. If anything, the human seemed excited to see it. "Can you do other forms?" Sung-hee asked, pulling out her tablet to take notes. "I'm writing a paper on alien shape-shifting abilities for my engineering degree. This is perfect research material." "Gout." Insu arrived with a security team, but instead of showing up with weapons drawn and faces full of terror, they looked like tourists on an exciting vacation. "Is this one of those reality TV shows?" asked Corporal G-Man. "Because if so, I didn't." "Sign a release form." "This is actually happening," Inzu replied, then turned to the shapeshifter. "I have to ask, how do you maintain structural integrity while changing forms so rapidly? The energy requirements alone must be enormous." The Vorthok warrior tried one more time, shifting into what its psychic scans said was the captain's deepest. Fear being buried alive. Corridor walls seemed to close in, dirt began falling from the ceiling, and the air became thick and hard to breathe. Captain Insu looked around with interest. Claustrophobia simulation. Very effective illusion work. The tactile feedback is amazing. I can actually feel the dirt. He reached out to touch a wall. Solid light projection. Some kind of matter manipulation. This is fascinating. By now. Word had spread throughout the ship. Crew members were actually coming to watch the aliens perform their fear tricks. Someone had started a betting pool on what shape the creatures would take next. "I've got 10 credits on Giant Snake, called Out Mechanic High One. 20 on Zombie Apocalypse," countered Cookman-SOOK. The Vorthok infiltrators found themselves in an impossible situation. They were designed to be the ultimate terror weapons, but their audience was treating them like street performers. Worse, the humans were giving them reviews. "The transformation speed is good, but the roaring needs work," commented Dr. Young-Sik, the ship's medical officer. "It's too obviously artificial. Real predators don't roar like that. It would give away their position." One of the shapeshifters finally gave up and returned to its natural form, a tall gray creature with large black eyes. "We don't understand," it said in perfect Korean. "Why aren't you afraid?" Taeho, still filming, shrugged. "Because we've seen it all before, buddy. You guys are basically doing cover versions of our greatest hits." The alien looked around at the circle of interested human faces. "But we are the terror of the galaxy. We're nightmare-made flesh," said Captain Insu kindly. "But we invented nightmares. You're just borrowing our ideas." 3 weeks after the Vorthok invasion began, everything had changed. The galaxies. Most feared monsters were now running away from humans instead of chasing them. What started as a terror campaign had become the strangest hunting season in history. Corporal Nayun crept through the dark corridors of the space, Station Delta 7, following the trail of slime left by a Vorthok infiltrator. Her squad moved behind her, but they weren't scared or nervous. They were excited. This was their 5th hunt this week, and they were getting good at it. "Motion sensor shows it went left at the next junction," whispered Private Junho, checking his tablet. "Heart rate is elevated. It's definitely scared," Good Nahun replied. "Okay, remember, we want to catch this one alive." The science team needs more samples. They had developed a point system for hunting Vorthax. Basic shapeshifters were worth 5 points. Fear projectors were worth 10. The rare sanity breakers that could supposedly drive people insane were worth 25 points. Nayun's squad was currently leading the station-wide competition. The alien they were tracking was a Class 3 horror, worth 15 points. It could create realistic illusions and project terrifying images directly into people's minds. A month ago, creatures like this had conquered entire worlds. They found it hiding in a storage room, pressed against the back wall like a cornered animal. When it saw the humans, it immediately shifted into its most frightening form. A massive creature with dozens of writhing tentacles and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. "You, tentacle monster," said Private Minru, taking pictures with her phone. "Haven't seen one of those in a while?" "Oh, very retro." The creature let out a psychic scream designed to paralyze its enemies with terror. Instead, the humans winced and covered their ears. "Okay, that's just rude," Nayun said. "We're trying to have a conversation here." She pulled out a small speaker and played a death metal song at full volume. The Vorthic's psychic scream was completely drowned out by the pounding drums and screaming guitars. "Much better," Nayun said, turning down the volume. "Now, are you going to come quietly, or do we need to do this the hard way?" the alien tried to escape, but the humans had become experts at Vorthok behavior. They herded it into a corner using foam barriers and capture nets. Within minutes, the unstoppable terror of the galaxy was wrapped up like a birthday present. Meanwhile, on the military transport Sol Express, Sergeant Bioram was leading a training exercise for new recruits. But instead of using practice targets, they were using real Vorthok prisoners. Remember, she told the young soldiers, these creatures are basically living special effects. They look scary, but they're all show. Watch this. She walked up to a caged Vorthok warrior, one of the largest and most frightening specimens they had captured. The creature was nearly 3 meters tall, covered in black scales, and had glowing red eyes that supposedly drove people mad with fear. "Hey there, big guy," Borum said cheerfully. "Want to show the recruits your scary face?" The Vorthok glared at her with pure hatred, then shifted into its most terrifying form, a writhing mass of darkness, with screaming faces embedded in its surface. The new recruits jumped back, but Borum just nodded approvingly. "Very nice. Good texture work on the faces. But you're still using the same old tricks. Watch this, everyone." She pulled out her tablet and showed the creature a video of a human horror movie. "This is from a film we made 50 years ago. See how the monster moves? It's much more fluid than your shapeshifting, and the sound design is way better." The Vorthok's form flickered with confusion. It had spent centuries perfecting its terror techniques only to be told by a human that a movie monster was scarier. Back on Earth, the situation had become even more absurd. Human children were now actively seeking out Vorthok encounters. Schools organized field trips to captured Vorthok ships. Parents hired shapeshifters for birthday parties. 8-year-old Subin stood in front of a captured Vorthok with her arms crossed, looking very serious. "Can you turn into a dinosaur?" she asked. The alien, desperate to regain some dignity, shifted into a massive T-Rex with extra teeth and glowing eyes. Subin considered this carefully. "That's okay, but the proportions are wrong." T-Rex arms were smaller and the head was bigger. Also, they probably had feathers. "Want me to show you some pictures?" Creature's form collapsed back to its original shape. Being critiqued by a small child was somehow worse than any torture that Vorthok had ever imagined. The most devastating blow to Vorthok morale came when human entertainment companies started hiring them as actors. The aliens found themselves performing. In horror movies, their millions of years of evolution turned into a day job with lunch breaks and union contracts. Director Park Chan-wook stood behind his camera, watching a Vorthok shapeshifter practice its lines. More menacing, he called out, "You're supposed to be terrifying, not depressed. And can you make the tentacles move with more rhythm? Think of them as dancers, not just random flailing." The War Master received reports from across human space that made his many hearts sink. His warriors were being hunted for sport. His infiltrators were being captured and studied. His psychological weapons were being turned into entertainment. Worst of all, human children were drawing pictures of Vorthok creatures and putting them on their refrigerators next to pictures of puppies and flowers. The terror of the galaxy had become humanity's favorite new pet. The final meeting took place on the neutral space station Harmony, floating in the empty space between Earth and the Vorthok fleet. War Master Zethkar had demanded to speak with humanity's leaders face to face. He needed to understand how his unstoppable terror campaign had turned into a complete disaster. Ambassador Sojin waited in the conference room, reading fan fiction on her tablet. Human writers had already created thousands of stories about the Vorthok invasion, most of them romantic comedies where humans fell in love with the alien monsters. She found them hilarious. The air in the room suddenly grew cold and dark. Reality seemed to bend and twist as Zethkar materialized in his most horrifying form. He was a writhing mass of cosmic horror that existed in too many dimensions at once. His presence should have driven any viewer completely insane. Eyes opened and closed randomly across his surface, and tentacles made of pure darkness reached out from impossible angles. Sojin looked up from her tablet with mild interest. "Oh, you're early. Would you like some coffee? We have an excellent Korean blend." The War Master's 1,000 voices spoke as one, creating a sound like the screams of dying stars. "I'm Zethkar, the nightmare beyond dreams, the terror that stalks between dimensions, the darkness that devours light itself. Right, got the memo, Sojin said, not looking up from her tablet. Look, Zeth. Can I call you Zeth? This whole cosmic horror thing is very last century. We've moved on to more psychological terror these days. Body horror, existential dread. The fear of being alone in an uncaring universe. Your style is more, what's the word, ... retro? The ancient terror lord found himself speechless. In millions of years of existence, no one had ever called him retro. The thing is, Sojin continued, finally setting down her tablet, you've built your entire civilization on being scary. But we've been imagining creatures like you since we lived in caves. Told stories about monsters in the dark to teach our children to be brave. You're not showing us anything new. Zethkar's form flickered with confusion. But I am the ultimate. Fear. I am the terror that has broken 1,000 worlds. Are you, though? Sojin asked. Because honestly, I've seen scarier things in children's cartoons. My 8-year-old nephew draws monsters that are more creative than you. She pulled up her tablet and showed him a crayon drawing. This is what little Jinwoo drew last week. See a monster that feeds on happiness instead of fear? That's terrifying. Because it gets stronger the more you try to fight it with positive emotions. Your creatures just want to scare people, which is pretty basic. The War Master's many eyes blinked in rapid succession. You critique our terror techniques? Of course we do. We've been perfecting the art of fear for thousands of years. We have entire universities that study what makes things scary. We have focus groups that test which monsters are most effective. We have professional critics who review horror entertainment for a living. Commander Minho entered the room, carrying a thick folder. Sorry I'm late. Was reviewing the latest reports from our xenobiology teams. He looked at Zethkar with scientific interest. Fascinating dimensional manipulation. How do you maintain molecular cohesion across multiple reality planes? What? Zethkar's form began to destabilize. You're supposed to be cowering in. Fear? Why would we be afraid? Minho asked. You're basically a living special effect. It's very impressive, but we've seen it all before. Your shapeshifting is decent, but the transitions are too obvious. Your fear projections are too literal. Your roaring needs work. It's too theatrical. Sojin nodded in agreement. We've analyzed your entire species' approach to terror. You rely too heavily on visual shock value, and not enough on psychological manipulation. Real fear comes from the unknown, but you show people exactly what they're supposed to be afraid of. But I am the unknown, Zethkar protested. I am the cosmic horror that exists beyond understanding. No, you're not, Sojin said gently. You're very knowable. You're a shape-shifting energy being that feeds on fear and exists in multiple dimensions. We figured that out in the first week. We've already got 3 different theories about how your biology works. She pulled up a holographic display showing detailed scientific analysis. C. Dr. Kim's team thinks you're quantum entities that exist in probability states. Dr. Lee's group believes you're living dark matter constructs. Dr. Park thinks you're actually from a parallel universe where the laws of physics are slightly different. Zethkar stared at the data in horror. His species had spent eons being mysterious and unknowable, and these humans had turned them into a science project. The truth is, Minho said, we don't fear monsters because we are the monsters. We've imagined every possible form of terror and then invented heroes to fight them. We don't run from nightmares. We turn them into bedtime stories. What are you? Zethkar whispered, his form now barely holding together. So Jin smiled. We're the species that looks at the abyss and decides it's not dark enough. We're the ones who see cosmic horror and think we can do better. We don't fear the unknown, Zethkar. We make it known, study it, improve it, and then teach our children to laugh at it. The War Master's form collapsed completely. For the first time in his existence, he felt something he had never experienced before, the terror of being ordinary. Please, he begged, just let us leave. Of course, Sojin said kindly. But first, would you mind signing some autographs? You've become quite popular with human children.